Last time on Wanderlust.
The birds for actual flying of humans is pretty rare, and it's just used occasionally for town to town travel since rails are impossible now.
I think they are able to have a pseudo NASA type thing.
Big Zilla Project wins. They're not paying for these resources because, look, we're going to get the satellites working again and you'll be able to talk to people again.
As they are being forced to work together again, is there a way that we could do Eco Urb to Eco Urb transportation that doesn't hurt the planet?
So the infrastructure takes a backseat to the
Exula project.
There is a group that forms a new religion that praises the ring, and they believe that satellites are against that god's will. The majority of them are more annoyed that the Eco Urbs aren't doing enough to live with nature, so they just aren't actually building houses. They're just wandering nomads. The Eco Urbs don't really care because they're not really affecting nature.
The idea of being able to go to another Eco Urb to be a part of a bigger school or college type of a situation gets planted here.
And now you have people who are traveling through basically what has been reclaimed and seeing the beauty of it, and you have people who are basically Henry David Thoreauing it.
Get a lot of poetry.
I don't think we've come together enough at this point to have specific rules, but if those people go out and they don't come back, I think that reinforces to the people in the Eco Urbs that they should not be going out and doing that.
Oh, that's probably a holiday, right? It's Reconnection Day or whatever, is when, all these people heard from their loved ones again as the Eco Urbs were suddenly able to communicate again. Next stage is kind of talking through basically our Eco Urb. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the world-building part of Wanderlust.
World building, part 47.
This is I think this is only part 5. I think we've only done one age thing. So, where we're starting with this episode, maybe we start with the past, right? Previous one ended with a renewal of the space program to fix satellites that had been repaired by lunar collisions. And now we are kind of picking back up with defining our world. So not our specific town yet, but our world, how we're actually going to be playing in it. That's kind of going to be the first part of this episode. Then when we're done with that, we're going to move on to defining our town specifically a little bit, or our Eco Urb rather. So to start with, not worrying so much about how we end up getting there, let's talk about how connected we think the world is in this most modern age, where we're playing now. You want to get from one Eco Urb to the other? What do we think that looks like?
So I had a thought, or I thought long and hard about this, and I like the idea of the hyperrails kind of only exist for emergencies. Because we talked about the hyperrail being rebuilt. And I like the idea where the Eco Urbs are still kind of on their own and you can get to them by roads. You can walk them decently easy, there's maintained roads. But I think the hyperrail itself is just not maintained in the same way.
So let me give you this reasoning for my suggestion on that. Think about what is the most sustainable way to get from point A to point B, right? The issue with roads is it requires you to cart heavy machinery across all of nature to maintain those roads. And then stops then kind of have to be dictated on how far a conveyance can move before it has to stop, right? So if you're talking about traveling between Eco Urbs on foot, that means you have to have structures every half a day on foot, or people can't travel it on foot easily. Does that make sense?
Unless we have vehicles that function as semi-trucks where they have beds in them.
Right. Now we're talking about what means of conveyance then do we want between things? So, I mean, right now our world has semi-trucks. Those have pitfalls, right? It's single machines that can crash into each other that require tons of maintenance and resources to run them, right?
I liked the idea of, well, in my head, the idea I had was, and this is like very much aping books I've read, is just like sci-fi covered wagons, basically.
What is a sci-fi covered wagon? I'm interested.
Basically something you can live out of that can also pull something. So it's basically it's like an RV without diesel fuel. You can pedal it to move it forward, but, physics, I don't know if that would actually work. It's been a long time since I've done momentum engineering.
Gotcha. Let me think about it. Other thoughts from other people. Nothing set in stone yet. Give me ideas.
Also, I want to say I'm not opposed if we say the hyperrail's just there. I just like the idea of them being a little bit more isolated and not just you can hop on a train and get there immediately. Is more what I like.
Put a pin in it. We'll come back to it. Other ideas from other people.
I mean, I definitely think there's high-speed rail. I think, okay, so the way that I envision it is, once again, we're looking at the national Eco Urbs as having the main majority of that. You've got, what did I say, I think before, 5 to 10, and they're the ones that have maybe consistent daily high-speed rail, maybe multiple times a day, depending, because they're going to be the ones that are more connected. I think for coming all the way out to Smokey Banks, that's going to be once a week, maybe even less than that, because you don't have to do that, but it is important to have it in either an emergency or the occasional people going out there. I'll let you kind of set this up a little bit more, Cody, but you talked about how Smokey Banks is at least a hub for a little bit of tourism for the ruins that are there, but also we might have a college of some sort that studies those. I'll let you elaborate more on that, but I think because of that, there's at least a high-speed rail that can get people out to us.
So, thinking about each Eco Urb individually, right? They are meant to function largely by themselves, but any amount of remotely modern comfort and stability requires a global economy. One, just because of efficiency and collection of expertise. If you want a computer, you can't manufacture a computer in every Eco Urb, right? So those have to be built somewhere, and those would require concentrations of people. If you want to be able to manufacture steel, you have to have a massive structure to do that efficiently. And doing it one at a time in foundries that you have in your backyard, it isn't sustainable. It pollutes more, if everyone's making their own steel, right? And it's dangerous. So I think that each Eco Urb is probably going to have certain things that they specialize in, especially, for example, Mandy's character, once we get to this, came from a much larger Eco Urb. They would have some center of manufacturing there and would have some imports and exports. The idea is to reduce that as much as possible, right? So you think if there's an Eco Urb that specializes in manufacturing bicycles, well, yeah, it doesn't necessarily make sense that you make bicycles bespoke in every single Eco Urb. What does make sense is that you could maintain a bicycle over multiple generations of a human's life in most Eco Urbs. So it's more about, in the Eco Urbs, you might have artisan goods that are meant to be sustainably produced, right? And not thrown away. They're meant to last as long as you can possibly stretch them for, multiple generations. It's more likely for you to inherit a backpack or get one used than it is for you to get a new one. But if you want to have textiles at all, that requires kind of an industrial center, right? And then you go, okay, well, how many Eco Urbs need to be producing fabric? Need to have the manufacturing to produce fabric? Definitely not every single one. So some amount of commerce is going to be essential. Now, where I think Zach is correct, and I think Mandy said the same thing, is that commerce that's large and heavy, very limited, does not happen often. So in the case of something like tourism, yeah, I mean, you could get on a train, probably, or some kind of mass transit, we can talk about what that is, and get to another Eco Urb. But you can't come back in 4 hours. You're there for a bit. But you think about a world where you don't have to be limited by how much vacation time you have, and you go, I want to take a month out there. You can actually just go out there and live for a month. Just work in their gardens, and that's fine. That type of tourism is a lot easier.
Or before we keep going, you and I talked about this like not on recording because we're friends.
Unlike me and the rest of everyone here. Yeah.
No, I meant more just like we're friends and we don't just only talk through recording.
I got you.
But you and I talked about the national eco urbs aren't national eco urbs anymore, right? Like
no, that's like the title that they kind of held on to. So the benefit of the last age, and this was like a good suggestion from Mandy, was that the national eco urbs had the most interreliance, which probably, like she said, is why they probably have the most constant transit between them. Because those eco urbs that stayed connected to the cities of way old they've always been a little bit more interconnected, right? They were the ones that got the space program off the ground just because they've always kind of held on to that idea of being, we work together eco urbs, rather than the way out boony ones that have been more isolationist and more, we do it ourselves, right? It's kind of two different mindsets about what the eco urbs can be. That difference has faded, but is probably not entirely gone. If you go to one of the eco urbs that's one of the oldest, it's been there the longest, it's one of the largest, it's still one of the most interconnected. So I think those things are all still true, even if they don't really still actually like pay taxes to a barren, dead city in the middle of the desert, because no one lives there anymore.
Yeah, I just wanted to make clear how they are interacted now, just because we haven't stated that on recording, and I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, but so the point I was getting to with something like a covered wagon and maybe small roads between eco urbs, I think those would have to be by their necessity pretty low tech and not frequently traveled. It would be dangerous because maintaining a road kind of decimates, or decimate isn't exact. I don't know. It degrades the environment that it's in, right? If you're maintaining an asphalt road, that requires every year you run incredibly heavy machinery up and down that road and repave it. But I think the idea of that being a similar thing to like riverboating, where it's people do it, but the wilds are getting dangerous because more and more people aren't going out there and are intentionally letting it go wild, that those roads would be pretty scary. So I don't think it's the only way that people travel for sure, but for short hops between eco urbs, I think it becomes more feasible.
Well, and to me, I don't think of, when I said roads, I was thinking more like
dirt road,
glorified dirt path that can hold a car, not asphalt paved. It's more just like,
right.
As long as we keep walking on this every year, shrubbery or, foliage doesn't grow over it.
Yeah.
Not so much we're paving it every year.
Right. But I guess, yeah, that then to me necessitates an alternative, right? If you're relying on this as your way of getting penicillin out to an eco herb, you don't want to be like, well, hopefully we don't get attacked by bears,
Well, then
so riverboats are the primary inter-herb.
I think it depends on the waterway, right?
Okay.
If you're an eco herb on a river, definitely. If you're not, well, if you're in the middle, if you're landlocked, shoot, hopefully you got some way to get stuff to you.
I mean, this is getting really in the weeds, so I apologize for that.
No, it's okay.
How many eco herbs are that far from like a river, though? Like, if you think of like civilizations, we like congregate around water until we.
Oh, sure, but there isn't a river from here to Los Angeles, right?
Right.
Like, if I wanted to go from here to Los Angeles, I can't do that on a riverboat.
But you can do it through a waterway, though.
That is because we have a world that is mostly ocean with a little bit of land. This is a land that is mostly land with a little bit of an ocean.
Fair enough.
Which changes that. And it also is frequently woefully inefficient. You know what I mean? It's why we don't ship things from New York to Los Angeles, like, around the globe to get there, You could, but no one does.
Well, I think that something that we should address, though, is that there's a certain amount of inefficiency with eco herbs. Like, this world is not built for efficiency anymore, where in real life, our current world is built for efficiency.
It's not built for efficiency of getting stuff there as quickly as possible. It is built for efficiency of not wasting stuff getting you what you need.
Yes.
So, like, food you can grow anywhere. Really. Most places you can grow food. It's just you have to grow the food that makes sense to grow there in the way that makes sense to grow it there. But, yeah, not everyone can have necessary manufacturing to make antibiotics or anesthesia or, high-tech cell phones, which is stuff that you're going to want at some point, And that's where some amount of commerce becomes necessary, right? And then like some amount of it to be pretty reliable. So to me, I like the idea of between areas where there's maybe eco urbs that are close, but we're talking a couple day journey at pretty low speeds, which I mean is the other thing to think about, right? Like we're used to traversing the United States at 70 miles an hour. We're talking at 20 max on something like you're talking about, which would effectively make crossing the United States take month at least, So if that's like your means of that can't be the only means of shipping goods, is my point.
Okay.
I think there would need to be like other ways of getting stuff other places and other ways of getting people to other places, because that is dangerous.
So combining what everyone said and then in my thoughts is there is limited commercial travel between Eco Urbs through Hyperrail. There is cargo that is shipped through there. It's primarily a cargo shipping.
I don't know that I would say it's limited. I would say that it is not at your convenience. If there is there's a schedule.
There is not Amazon one-day delivery.
Yeah, it's delivered when the train runs. If you are on the train when it runs, great. If you're not, sorry, we're not coming back for you. You got to get here when the train leaves.
Okay. So there's the trains that is quick travel at your convenience. There's riverboats that are kind of, if you're close to a river, are the primary ways. There are roads between close eco urbs.
Yeah.
And the one thing we haven't talked about, I think, emergency services, or their equivalent, is the birds. There's still like the postman.
I like that. Yeah.
So like if it's like, oh, this person needs a transplant of an organ, we use the birds.
Right. Like if there isn't an engine that we can get now, if it's across the country that's going to take it, like you can still always hop on a bird, and it's considered dangerous and scary to do that. Yeah. I like that.
Right. I think the birds are like very much like it is an emergency services kind of thing. It is not a public transport at all.
Yeah, or you're hiring a pilot and it's expensive, and there's no guarantee you're getting. And this could also be a fun thing, that this is kind of getting to a point where maybe personal flight mechanically is sort of a thing, but it's real sketchy. This is. You see those videos of people like pushing themselves off of cliffs into lakes trying to fly for the first time on planes that are like 80 wings stacked up. That's about where we're at. It's not good, Okay, I like that idea. My suggestion for rail would be that it is largely underground. Like it's been built once. The idea being then that you can let the surface of the planet do what it's supposed to do, which is return to the wilds.
I like that.
A reason for this being that, the mystique of the wilds, of the wilderness around these eco urbs kind of grows as, even if you do choose to travel, you go into a tube, you spend a day in the dark, and you pop out someplace completely different. It's like, who knows really what was between here and there? Nobody is keeping track.
Well, I also like the idea that there are trains now don't have windows. Like they're just like...
Yeah, because you'd just be looking at a tunnel.
And alternatively, I like how there's like some like luxury lines that are like still above ground, where it's like, oh, you can see the wilds.
I don't think there's luxury in the same way.
I could see that being a tourist trap certain places. Like,
maybe more tourist trap and less luxury line, Like glass bottom boats aren't used for fishing, but they're around.
I want to put a pin in that as something that might actually be kind of fun to have in our eco urb, like a little track up the mountain, Maybe it like just peeks over the wilds, like on an elevated thing, so you can like look down and be like, ooh, scary, and then you come back down into the town.
Gondola.
Yeah, I like that idea. Might be that's what I made my zoo and Planet Zoo like. I also made my zoo a nightmare. Anyways. All right, other thoughts from people on transit?
Nope.
Cool. Globally, let's talk a little bit about what we think the culture of the world is like. That's a vague question, but I guess, how do we think people communicate? How do we think people are entertained? What do people do with their leisure time in general in this world? This might not have changed much. We're kind of at the point of being able to send data-ish, and like, I think we're still at there's like internet cafes, basically. Maybe ask this. Do we think people have personal communication to anyone else?
In their homes, I don't think so. I think you have to go somewhere to do that. Or do you mean like within your eco urb?
I think what he's going for is Does an individual person have the ability to communicate themselves, or do they have to go somewhere else or have someone do it for them?
Okay.
So your answer would be no in that case, Caitlin.
I think that like within the Eco Urb, people have like radios.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Is there's a short range communication?
Yes,
but not necessarily a long distance.
But like between Eco Urbs, I think you'd have to go to an internet cafe.
Would you have a radio in your pocket, or is it not everybody? Is this like CB radios that truckers have, where it's like some people have them, some people don't?
My idea is that everyone has it, but it's not in your pocket. It's more like
in your house.
Everyone has a radio in their house, like a house phone equivalent. But not everyone has one in their pocket going around, or no one has one in their pocket going around.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the question: is it that no one has it, or that some people have it, and you're going with no one?
This is the type of thing that it's hard to not imagine having, like being in a society that does have it.
No. Some of this is me setting this as important limitations for me in the game. Generally, my rule is you all have talk rocks somehow. I'm fine with that not being the case right now, though, and going,
No, I'm saying it's really hard to, like, we struggle in other games not having that. So it's tricky.
I kind of like the idea, though, of it being, at best, you have short-range radios in your homes.
I was going to say, I think that mediators have individual ones so that the people in charge can get a hold of the other people in charge quickly without having to rely on running back home, seeing if they're home. I think they need to be in better communication because they are so often in different places rather than most of the rest of the town.
Let me make maybe this suggestion as a slight addendum to that, because Zach mentioned emergency services. What if it's like there is town-wide PAs frequently, so big announcements can go out through the whole Eco Urb. People in authority can use those, right? So if it's like urgent, like, we have something bad happening, get on the PA and tell everybody. And then maybe like certain like frequently head or elected people have portable radios, but they're big, right? They're kind of large. They're cumbersome to carry around.
Like boombox.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like the sheriff might have one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like,
Sure.
Maybe the sheriff's office has like a dispatcher of, oh, hey, we got a call about this. We need you to get out here. And he's got like this big old freaking radio he's got to lug around with him everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it goes dead once you're a little bit out of town. And then maybe like, a few other, like, if you have like a mayor of the town, maybe they have one, like the big red phone of emergency to call Batman with or something like that.
It's like
I like that idea that it's very limited who has those.
It's something you have to crank up every time you want to use it.
Yeah, and maybe that's like limited. That's like a function of limited technology. If there isn't really a way to make discrete calls to people, if this is all going out over the air, it's kind of, you can't have everyone talking on a group line, and your frequencies become, controlling who is on what frequencies becomes important if you don't have the technology to direct those calls, which is kind of like what we have now. I like that. I like that idea. That's fun.
I also just got my NPC.
Oh,
so
I've changed my NPC now.
You can have two. Keep that in mind.
Okay, well, I might have two now instead of one.
So, springboarding off of that, I think culture itself is much less concerned about privacy because talking with people is just like on open channels. And not that people don't respect privacy, like how our world actually is, where like companies just steal our data. But people are just more open with things, and there are less like social taboos of things to talk about.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Interesting.
Like something, I'm trying to think of something like that, like we just like don't talk about in like culture that like people are just okay with talking about. But
I mean, it could even be something as simple as like money, because it's a lot less,
yes.
Like how much you make and how much stuff costs becomes a lot more open and assumed to be open, like it's not taboo to discuss if you have like whatever small business doing something. People probably would want to know, like, how much are you skimping off the top on this? Like
things are more transparent.
Yeah. It is assumed that they will be. I'm trying to think about what else might be an interesting one to be more.
I was going to suggest periods. Just as like a thing that's taboo to like talk about in public that isn't.
No, I mean, that's true. Like health concerns in general too. Like, I mean, I think that's something that we're generally pretty squeamish about, is discussing health issues, partially because a lot of times that is like linked to finances as well. But yeah, I like that idea.
The thing that I think is interesting is, or the thing that I like is like relationships are also much more talked about. Like there isn't the like teenagers, there isn't so much as like, oh, do you like them? It's just like out in the open, and things that involve like your marriage, like, oh, if you, well, like the one that popped into my mind is like miscarriages are more talked about, like, because in our side of society they're like never mentioned.
Well, and I think that can be that there is in general like a better drive to understanding humanity holistically. Oh, you know what? This is honestly maybe an interesting one to say too, is probably like way more social norm around like pretty important birth control, you know, kind of like all wraps into this, which is that like humanity cannot reproduce at a rapid rate forever, confined to Eco Urbs. Like those Eco Urbs have a limit. So like understanding just in general how people reproduce, how to not reproduce necessarily, and like educating that at a pretty young age probably becomes pretty important. That like needs to be literate to everybody. You know what I mean? Because that's like an
body literacy.
Yeah. In that it corresponds to how the Eco Urb functions. Like this is all about maintaining a balance, right? We have to very carefully maintain all of these different fluctuating levels that let a cluster of humanity survive in this structure. That means really important, like we have to garden just this right way, and we have to balance all these nutrients, all that stuff. And I think that becomes true for also, like, people need to be responsible for, you know, having the right amount of people, not too many, not too few, you know, all that stuff becomes important. Anyways.
They're paying attention to, like, the interconnectedness of biology and how those systems function.
Right, and no part of that can be taboo.
I think mental health is also talked about a lot more because you're all relying on each other so much. So, like, if someone becomes depressed, for example, and starts not pulling their weight, that's a concern for the community. They want to help them get better and not just be like, oh, we can't talk about this. This is a taboo, you know?
I had thought of, like, sort of like a motto for, I don't know if, like, all Eco Urbs have adopted this, but it was, like, a slogan that I had thought of. So what I had was, responsibility is everyone's right. And everyone's rights are our responsibility. So basically...
Oh, I love that.
Responsibility is everyone's right. Like, everyone has a purpose. And it's not... It's going away from, like, the capitalistic, like, your purpose is making money. And that, like, purpose gives life meaning, right? And then everyone's rights are our responsibility. Like, we advocate for each other and protect each other. And, like, that's how we're able to continue as a community.
No, I think that is a good encompassment of what this is supposed to be, because it is one of those things that these only work if everyone buys into it. You know, like it assumes that everyone's on board. You know,
is that the slogan that's specifically under like the Smokey Banks sign?
I don't know if we want to make it Smokey Banks specific or just like a.
I think that feels personal. I like that. Yeah, I think that can go under the sign. I like that.
I like it too. I have two things that I want to talk about. So first, I think that entertainment has moved into a much more ancient Greece way of doing things. When I say that, it's like open outdoor things.
Oh, yeah.
It's, you know, you've got like the amphitheater or like how people set up in parks now. So, you know, just like a stage and lots of grass to sit on, to watch these people. And I would say it's definitely frequent. I would say basically nightly they have something happening. It can be a variety of things. It can be, you can have the musicians up there. You can have anybody who wants to do theater or, you know, whatever it is, because I imagine there are people who want to keep this stuff alive. You have people who sometimes you'll just have older folks who are passing along the stories of the Eco Urb.
Oh, that's cute. I like that.
But it's definitely, it's a very communal art. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word. Oh my gosh. I don't
know what word you mean. I'm sorry.
That was a very funny expression you did, though. I liked it.
I don't know. It's a communal art thing.
I want to add on to that because there's something I like about that.
Scene?
Scene. That's the word. Scene. Communal art scene.
Oh, okay. I love this because it goes perfectly into Cody's thing of like not having hierarchies of art, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to say is I like the idea of older people when they get to a point where the physical requirements of gardening gets to be too hard. They entertain people working in the gardens, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like you got, this little old granny there just, I don't know, whatever, knitting and just telling stories as you're working in the garden, or, like some dude playing a guitar or something like that. That's kind of fun.
So you're saying what people do is they listen to podcasts as they work in the garden.
Yeah, well, I mean, people have always done that, radio or whatever, but yeah.
The thing that I was thinking about this as well is that each Eco Urb is different than the next. Like, culture is not nearly as homogenous as it is currently.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So it's just like one Eco Urb, as Mandy said, might be really into singing. Like, everything is song. And then you go 10 miles down the road to the next Eco Urb, and they're like, we don't sing anything. Everything is a play.
It's just that, like, different areas have different, like, specializations.
Well, not just specializations, but just, like, completely different cultures, because, like, in the world...
I don't think nobody would sing somewhere.
I mean,
singing is so ubiquitous. But I do know what you mean.
Well, but what that sounds like might be wildly different, what it's used for, are you in a place where it's all like epic poems and everything's done in verse, or is it more theatrical storytelling, or you do like ballads? But that is kind of fun, the idea of what you hear when you're there being very different and, specialized to the group of people.
Well, and I would argue that there are places that don't have singing in the same way. Like, I mean, it is ubiquitous, but like there are delineations in different Eco Urbs. There's so many different Eco Urbs that there's probably a place where they're like, no, you don't sing, you like speak in a rhythm, and that is what we consider singing. That is our Eco Urb, that is our entertainment,
Or at the very least, that is the prominent version of singing there. Because whatever it is, everything ebbs and flows in how big something is versus something else.
Yeah, whatever it is, the young people are going to be doing it wrong, so.
Yeah.
And this being said, I'm not saying this is Smokey Banks, I'm just saying, in different places, there's different things happening. Culture is much more isolated than we currently have it, where I can share a meme with anyone around the globe and they will understand what it means.
Well, and this is the exact opposite of driving across America and always being able to find a Chili's. Like, 100% different than that,
So that actually is a nice little segue into the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is the idea of, like a restaurant. So I don't think that we necessarily have that anymore, but because this is an NPC idea that I have. But,
I'm worried I'm about to disagree with you.
So I think the idea of a chef is still a thing, but it's not that they are in like restaurants. It's more of like their thing would be to educate people on like the foods in the area that they can cook, and like different ways that you can do that if you're struggling, that kind of thing. But also for big things, if there's big festivals or holidays, they are like in charge of that for the community. So there is like the option of learning how to do something nicer, learning how to use your food in a more creative way, but it's not, and especially for a local, regional food, regional cuisine, but it's not like you go and you sit down in a restaurant anymore.
So I think I disagree with you, but we'll get to it. I don't totally disagree. This is an interesting question. Food is fascinating to me because it's one of those things that is essential for human life, but also in our world, extremely tied to wealth, right? So your social class really determines the type of food that you eat. So this is about economy now and how our economics function. We talked about this briefly, I think, and this might be some of the stuff that I've known behind the scenes. So generally, the point is 20 hours a week, you work in 20 hours is nebulous, whatever. A certain amount of time, not a ton. You work in the gardens to make food. It's the responsibility of everybody. Something Mandy pointed out that I should clarify. When I say the gardens, what I mean is a closed loop ecosystem that produces food. That would include things like purifying water, handling waste, handling trash. All of that has to be holistically designed to perpetuate itself. There can't be a lot of leak out of that. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You know what I mean? So your gardens have to also process waste, create pure water, recycle containers, and make food, and handle livestock. All of that has to feed into itself and be sustainable, and basically not require external inputs, right? Now, beyond that, how do we... Okay, let me maybe not specify this as a question. Let me say it and then see what you guys think. Beyond that, in my mind, the way the economy would function would basically be if you do extra work that is considered societally valuable, you earn a currency at like a flat rate that is not based on exchange, right? So you do extra work, you get credit, sci-fi credit, right? So if you make backpacks, you get credit. You know what I mean? Now, the odd distinction here is that the currency is not tied to the object. It's tied to the amount of time you spend helping society, which is to say, if you make a really high value object, maybe one that requires a lot of resources but doesn't take all that long to make, it might cost 30 credits, but you get the credit for working this much time. Do we all understand what I mean by that?
Yes.
Which is to say that credits do not accrue and are not traded directly, at least not often, not in purchases. So if you run a store and the price for an object probably would not be set by you. There would be like a standard price. It costs $50 to buy a backpack. It costs 50 credits to buy a backpack, right? So someone would come in and spend 50 credits, they would get a backpack. You don't get those 50 credits. You get credits for making backpacks. Does this make sense?
Interesting.
Where did the credits go? Where did the 50 credits go?
They don't. They don't represent anything. Zero. They have no tangible value.
I think what it is that the credits are just evaporated, but you can earn credits by adding value to society.
Yeah.
So if I make a backpack, I earn 5 credits per hour I spend on making that backpack. That means I make a backpack, I have 50 credits, but when I spend those 50 credits, they just dissipate because I'm not adding value. No one gains those,
right?
Because no one was adding value by selling it to me, kind of thing.
This stops people from being able to hoard value, essentially, because you never gain value for having lots of stuff.
Right. The only way you can gain value or gain credits is by
working for society.
Working for society. So if I make 5,000 backpacks, like I may have a huge credit, but like I can't, hoarding it does me nothing because I can't just accrue more without spending more time working.
And then also soft things can also earn credits, right? You're a performer that would earn credits, right? The reason this becomes relevant for you guys is this is how you're going to earn money to buy stuff within the game, is if you have professions outside of, oh, okay. And then this is where it gets into like dubious legality, is someone like, what's her name? Sorry, this is a little bit spoilery for the future, but it matters. There would be some kind of crime and black market here. I think you can give people credits. Like you can give your son credits. You can give your friend credits for things. That does mean that people can trade directly for credits, right? It is just frowned upon and kind of illegal. You know what I mean? It's like if you do it, you're getting a gift and then giving someone else a gift. And it is like under the table and technically a crime.
So kind of how we view nepotism.
Yeah. Sorry. So the reason now that I'm asking is, how do we want produced food to work, right? Do we think cooking is something that can be done for the social good and therefore earned credits? Or is it just part of the gardens that, you're working in the gardens and someone every day, you have like a cafe where you go and everyone eats. So the reason I don't like the idea of not having restaurants, Mandy, is I think that people would want to congregate around food, right? Like that's a thing that we typically do. We all sit around and eat a meal together. So I think there would need to be a space for that. Does that make sense?
I was going to suggest that there are maybe like food trucks, like food truck equivalents that maybe stay for a season in places. And so they go to like a downtown area that people congregate in, but it's not always the same person, but it's frequent that they're there for a while. I also think that people get an allotment of food from the gardens, but it's pretty common to like work out with your neighbors, like you're cooking this day. I'm cooking this day. So it would be uncommon for you to be cooking for yourself every single day.
Yeah, so completely ignoring everything Caitlin just said. And I want to put that out there. Like, I'm not adding on to what you're saying. I like the idea that cooking has become a sport. So every night you got, like, you know, you have your, like, pod of people you cook with, and you all cook a dish because food is kind of just free because you all work in the gardens. So, like, you're all given tomato. It's like, who can prepare the best salad? And then you all make salads and then compare your salads to each other. Also, if you could completely throw mine out, I'm not offended.
Well, I don't want to throw any of this out yet because I think it's all interesting ideas. So, Mandy, going back to your thing, you said you didn't think there were restaurants, right?
Yes.
Okay, so do you then imagine that people would basically always be cooking all of their own meals or like preparing all their own food?
I think a lot of the time, yes.
Because I like that idea that culturally it becomes much more common for people to prepare their own food. But then I'm trying to think of like social gatherings involving food. Like, okay, maybe let me ask it in this direction, right? It's evening in the Eco Urb, right? We've all worked our day doing our gardening and then also our individual trades that we may or may not have. What do we think people do in the evening to hang out with each other, right?
Is every meal just a potluck?
Maybe. That's a possibility.
Okay, so let me back up. So I think maybe as a way to kind of like synthesize all this, maybe what it is that midday is when like because generally the assumption would be that people would be out at some point, either like morning or afternoon. So midday, it's much more communal. There is either food trucks or, like I said, there's like somebody who is leading, like, you know, if you're in the gardens, you can come over here and get something, and it's much more communally available. Personally, I think like evening time, it's a little bit more like familial, and it doesn't have to be just family. It could be like your pod. It could be you and your neighbor, but it's a little bit smaller. And I think like this is where you could be like, oh, tonight I just want to be in, or tonight we're going to bring ours to the stage, to the amphitheater, and go watch somebody and eat. So I think evening is much more flexible for the individual.
I like that because that like imitates earlier farming sort of schedules. Like lunch was the big midday meal because you'd been working for like 6 hours already. And that was like the meal of the day. So I like that.
What if the big meal of the day is made by the children in school? Like their way of serving the community, like they're learning how to do these things, but they're also just being, oh, you cook the meal for all the adults while they're in the fields every day.
I have thoughts on this. So that it takes some ideas here. So I think breakfast, right, is maybe, let's say, largely in the home, it is assumed, right? You wake up, you eat breakfast real quick. I think the gardens then are where you have something similar to food trucks, right? So you're in the middle of a workday, you don't have time to make food. So part of working in the gardens is some people end up on kitchen duty, but that's shared. Everyone rotates through that. Maybe some people are a little bit better at it, and this is where we can maybe get into some like elected positions, are like garden chef is maybe an elected position of like they plan the meals, they figure out what everyone makes, but working on the food trucks is something that everybody does, right? So this week you're on meal duty, you're sitting there cutting up stuff or cooking sandwiches, whatever, right? That's part of the gardens is lunch, which might be a larger meal. And then maybe your evening meal is, you know, yeah, you have food from the garden, you cook at home, eat with your neighbors, a little bit more cozy. If you're out on the town, maybe this would then be a time that you are spending or earning credits, right? You work in like the inn by the amphitheater, that's like that's for society, you're making credits now. And this is maybe a little bit more extravagant food, a little bit more, it might be like smaller meals, but fancier stuff, or like more prepared stuff, this is where you might get this in the evening, but it's like not assumed. And then maybe also there's like the cafeteria food is also, you know, free if you just want to like go and pick up something to snack on. That might also be there just from the gardens. But I like that idea that there is a lot of people are cooking for themselves. Part of it is cooking in the garden. And then if you do want to go out and get a fancy meal, that actually like costs money.
Can like kids be rotating cooking for their classmates then as like a precursor to like what you'll eventually be doing in the gardens?
So
Cody and I have talked a lot about the education system.
Me and Mandy talked a lot about the education system.
Okay, I'm trying to incorporate Zach's idea.
That's fine if my idea is not what we decide on, because we're working on this together.
It's close. There's some ideas that we had that are basically that, but a little different.
So my other idea about restaurants, though, is it's not how... Like, you can get a fancy meal and it's nice and you can pay credits for it, but it's not the same as how we have restaurants. I think when you go to a restaurant, at the same time, if you get this fancy meal prepared by, like, the best chef in the town, they also teach you how to make it every time.
I don't know. I think that could be a thing. I don't know that would be every time, though, because sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a meal, right? Like, that's leisure activity. You know what I mean?
My argument is it is for us.
Do you think it's all, what's it called? Like Japanese steakhouse? Hibachi, where they like cook it in front of you.
So my argument or my compromise is every meal is hibachi. Oftentimes they teach you how to make it, and you make it with them, and then you get to eat their dish with yours.
I think what I'm trying to get across here is that like there doesn't have to be, I don't think, a hard and fast rule about this. I think that could be entirely commonplace. I don't know that it has to be the rule. You know what I mean? Because like you think about a leisure evening after you've done a hard day's work. You just want to sit down and, like, eat a burger with a friend, right? Like, that's a wholesome thing to want to do. And I think that can happen. I just don't think that... I don't think there has to be as hard and fast rules about, like, we do this or we do not do this ever. You know what I mean? But I like the idea of, like, hibachi-style, like, cooking classes being really common because that's a community activity that you can do with your friends. You know, like the, like, wine and canvas or whatever kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
My argument is that this culture believes that that's how you just do it. You know, like, it's not considered like a chore. It's just like, oh, we're going out for a fancy meal. We learn how to cook the fancy meal. Not that it's like a chore, like, you have to do this. More like they're like, oh, we're going to, like, when you go to Wine and Canvas, you're not like, oh, I have to paint a painting.
No, I get what you mean.
Like, when you go out to a restaurant, you're like, oh, I get to learn how to make this fancy dish that I can then prepare for my pod tomorrow night.
Yeah, no, I get you.
That is my argument for that. When you go to a restaurant, it's not just going to get nice food, because food is much less of a commodity in this culture.
No, I don't think the food is the commodity. I think the preparation is, and the skill that goes into that. Because it does, you know, I mean, if you're eating something really fancy, that's like years of experience and work to be able to be, you know, perfect at something, right? Like if you're an artisanal person making this stuff, that takes time to get good enough at that to do that all the time, right? Like that takes work.
There are times you want to relax, I think is what Cody is saying.
Well, it's both that there are times that you want to relax, and there are people that are better than cooking at me because they've done it 100 times over, you know?
Yeah.
When you're getting into the persnickety details of art, yeah, there's excellent people that dedicate their life to it, and then those people are better than me, you know?
That was the other thing I was thinking about more globally about this culture, is that skill is valued, not speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of product, I think quality is valued and longevity, not speed. Yeah.
So you have someone who's like, oh, I've been a blacksmith for 40 years. Like, yeah, their products, like if they make a knife for cooking, it goes for 40 credits, where it's like, oh, I just started blacksmithing yesterday. My knife goes for 2 credits. And like, I think that's like a value thing of the culture. Not that like, they're saying like
skill of the person increases value.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that they like judge
because
people who are
just... Because it increases longevity.
Right. And I think this culture still promotes people getting into new skills and joining new hobbies. It's not frowned upon.
Sure.
But the longer you are in a hobby and the better you are at this skill, the more you are valued for it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like in fine knife making, there is like a system of, you know, being an apprentice, a journeyman, and a master, and the knives that you can sell change value based on whether you're an apprentice, a journeyman, or a master, you know. Like, you get an accreditation for that if you're like a master knifesmith. That's like, you have to make a knife and have someone test it, and it has to be freaking magical, you know?
I like that idea. I like how professions are tested like that, like across the board. It's not just like, you know, it's like, oh, you're backpack making? It's like, there's journeyman knife making, there's apprentice or apprentice backpack making, journeyman knife making, and I keep saying knife making, sorry. Apprentice backpacking, journeyman backpacking, master backpacking, where it's like a lot of the things have this categories. It's not just 4 professions that have it, it's across the board.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Okay, so this is a little bit mean. It's going to be a little bit mean, but me and Mandy talked a lot off recording about education.
I have one more question about food.
Yeah, sorry.
How much meat do people eat?
Oh, okay.
Because meat is very hard on the environment.
Let me give a caveat to that. Farming large quantities of specifically cattle is pretty devastating, right? So I like the idea of having a livestock of some kind of animal that you might eat. You can or you can't, right? That's a little bit up to you guys, and to the specific Eco Urb, but it has to fit within the closed loop, right? So you have to grow their food, or they have to be useful in some other ways. Like I think a lot of times, like hydroponics, like fish can be good for waste processing because there are fish that eat waste. So if you have a fish that can eat this is how populations of animals exist, right? Is something has to grow food for them, and then their food for something else, right? And humans are omnivorous. They've always eaten other animals. So that's part of us being within an ecosystem. Food exists. It just has to be within a balance, right? We're not meant to only eat meat.
So knowing that, my argument is not that meat is rare, but is uncommon. Like, you don't have meat with every meal.
Yeah, I think, it's just as common as it can be sustained within the Eco Urb. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think meat is considered slightly more of a delicacy in most Eco Urbs.
It's probably diversified a lot, too, from, like, in America, it's, like, chicken and cow, beef are, like, the big ones. So it's probably a lot more like rabbit.
I was thinking pigeon, but yeah.
I was going to suggest rat.
Well,
rat and goat.
Like, what it is animals that can fit within the ecosystem. Like, cow is fine. They hold a lot of calories. They have to eat a lot of food to make those, right? Which is not, it is woefully inefficient for specifically beef. But, like, the issue partially also with our, like, way of handling livestock is that it isn't, like, integrated back into the food chain. Like, their waste is not always turned into fertilizer that then grows food. It's like, it just ends up devastating a huge piece of land and then never reviving that huge piece of land. Like, if a cow is eating grass and then pooping on the grass and then eating the grass and then pooping on the grass, that, like, closes its loop where you're not losing a ton of calories on that cow to nothing and waste. It's not that bad. So I think that a variety of times of, whether you think that, you guys live near the ocean, it might be a lot of,
seafood,
aquatic life, because you can keep a population of seafood integrated in with your garden. Or smaller animals that are easier to keep alive within the garden and maybe require less of a commitment of calories to keep alive. Also those, maybe in Eco Urbs that have more flat plains around them, larger, cows make sense, if that's the way their gardens look. So I think what it is that whatever livestock you have, it has to mix evenly or easily into the Eco Urb that you have. It can't be like, over here we have a paddock of creatures that we pump calories into and then slaughter,
And so it's very geographic.
Right.
Very geographically linked. Yeah.
And it has to fit into the part of your Eco Urb.
Okay.
Or into the garden of your Eco Urb.
So in the desert, there's probably more like reptiles and stuff.
Yeah.
And in Smokey Banks, there's probably a lot more fish and
lobster,
seafood. Yeah.
So that made me think of another question. How is hunting looked at in this world?
I think it would be extremely uncommon.
Is it uncommon or is it frowned upon? Or both? Half
of this world, right, or half of the culture of this world is understanding that part of what we're doing is the wilds need to take care of themselves. Kind of the issue of humanity is it got too good at acquiring resources, right? Normally, there's a balance that happens naturally. You have, like, too many foxes, some of them starve, and then there's more rabbits, and then if there's too many rabbits, some of the rabbits starve, then you get more then foxes can eat more rabbits, and, if plants start to die out, the rabbits can't feed enough rabbits. So there is, like, a an ecosystem that happens organically that you're just trying to leave alone, right?
Right.
So hunting is necessarily taking things out of that eco herb or out of that ecosystem. The eco herb is different in that it is entirely humanly manufactured. It is designed to be a closed loop system that feeds humans, whereas the wilds are a system that feeds on itself.
Okay.
They don't necessarily sustain human life. They just, we're letting them do whatever they do. And there will be animals that die out because of, hiccups through the ecosystem. And there will be ones that flourish. And you don't involve yourself in that. Let the world do what it's going to do, right?
Then my argument is that hunting is frowned upon insofar as if an animal wanders into the eco herb, it's fair game.
I don't know that is strongly stipulated, and I think it would be down to the eco herb how they handle that and how dangerous the animal is, but I do not think that it is socially common to go out in the wild and kill things. I think that would be pretty horrendous seeming, given that the whole point of the wilds is to not touch them.
Right, and I think that like what Zach was saying, if an animal were to wander up to an eco herb, I feel like they would try to shoo it away first. Like they would try to just kind of nudge it away. And then if that doesn't work, or if it's dangerous enough that they can't do that, like it's starting to wreck stuff, then they'll take it down and they're not going to let that go to waste.
Yeah.
Like if it so happens that they had to kill an animal because it was doing damage to the eco herb, yeah, they'll kill it. And they'll also use it. I wonder if they would, or I wonder if they would intentionally leave it out in the wild and go like, scavengers are going to eat this. It's when it's on their doorstep though. The thing is,
I think that would be tricky. Is like, I think it might be a pretty like strong delimitation. Like if it crosses over, then it's in the eco herb. It has to go into our ecosystem. If it's in the wild, like you leave it there. You know. The problem
is if it's too close. Like if it's close enough that it's doing damage to the eco herb and they had to kill it, they can't just leave it there because then that's going to
you're right.
encourage other things. Yeah.
I see where you're going. It'll attract other animals. That's true. That's a fair point. Maybe, and maybe that's like there are people whose job it is to like drag the carcasses away from the walls, if they decide that's what to do.
I think that's what hunting is considered more so. It's like each eco herb decides at what point it's okay to kill a wild animal like running up against their walls, and do we harvest that? Do we drag it back into the wilds? Do we leave it there? Yeah. I think that's more what hunting is. People don't go out into the wilds to hunt animals.
Yeah, I don't think that would be considered a normal way to get food.
It's defensive versus offensive.
Yeah,
right. Like if something, and I think it varies based on eco herb, but the general rule globally is like if it touches your walls, it's fair game.
Yeah, I think that could be fine.
Some eco herbs are like, well, until it crosses over our walls, we don't touch it. Or there are some eco herbs that are like, if it's in 5 feet of our walls, we can touch it,
Yeah. I like that. I like that idea. All right, Zach, do you have anything else before I really quickly talk about education?
That is it. You can tell me about education.
Okay, so sorry this is going to be a little bit telly, but I'm always open to feedback on this. But me and Mandy were talking, and then we said something that I really loved, which is part of the gardens, there is a kindergarten. And so elementary school, kids go to the kindergarten for garden time, right? They're trying to grow food. They're trying to be a part of society, but it is assumed mistakes will be made there, and it is okay, right? So if a kid forgets to water the plants or runs through them and knocks over a whole bed of vegetables, it's okay. It's the kindergarten. It's a little bit more fast and loose, right? People are there to educate them and watch kids. And you do have some classes teaching like societally needed basics. So we were talking about like, your reading, your writing, your arithmetic, right? But also a huge key component of that is learning how the eco herb functions is like taught at kindergarten. You are learning how to do all of those necessary skills. Because you think about our education system that is kind of a leftover of industry needing bookkeepers is a lot of why our education system looks the way it does, is that we learned how to be bookkeepers. That's why we sit at desks and like write on paper things that you would need to know to be a bookkeeper, like hand arithmetic and letters, that's why that was encouraged by industry, was that they needed workers that could do that. Right. So what the eco herbs need is way less of people that can do that. And they just need people that can garden. So I think what me and Mandy got to is by the time you're done with kindergarten, what do we say, Mandy? Like 10-ish?
Yeah.
Is the end of kindergarten. You know, you're like not quite a teenager. You graduate kindergarten. And now you are expected to work in the gardens as a member of society. So you will be slotted into rotation. But I think that's where we talked about it being like limited hours. So maybe only 10 hours a week, right? You are working in the gardens and you're going to go through all of this. You are a member of society at that point, right? If you're on waste duty, you're on waste duty. If you're on kitchen duty, you're on kitchen duty, and you're going to learn you should have learned all of those skills in kindergarten, and now you're part of society. And the other part of that then is rotations, where you go out and just see other trades, right? So the other part of the time is learning about as many different trades as you can. All right, Zach, question.
For the gardens, like specifically the growing of food, is this food how much of this food is required for an Eco Urb to be sustainable? Like, are they relying?
Kindergarten, you mean?
Yeah, like the kindergarten. Like, what the children are making, if all of it fails, is that a problem?
No, that would have no effect. Would have no effect. It is on top of.
So my next question is, do the kindergartens teach them, like, how to make, like, it teaches them how to garden, but they're gardening harder plants, which are considered delicacies, where if they fail, it's like, oh, it's not a big deal. But if they succeed, it's really nice.
I don't think it's necessarily that. Like, I think it's way more that they need to learn how to garden the essentials, and they need to learn how to do that right every time. And you don't leave the kindergarten until you can do that.
See, so my thought is, like, that is, I understand what you're saying, but my thought is, like, the difference between, like, growing a dandelion versus growing a rose. Like, a rose is much harder to grow. You have to monitor, like, the pH of the soil and how much water you're giving it and all of that. And if you teach someone how to grow a rose, they can grow a dandelion. Whereas the inverse is not necessarily true.
So I think what it is it fully depends on your age. Like, this is very general. Kindergarten is roughly 5 to 6 years old to about 10 to 12.
Yeah, maybe even younger. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we're talking, maybe they are like split up by classes or age or whatever. But, your earliest kids are going, here's a tomato. What shape is the tomato? And let's
pick
just
the
do
red
that.
Things, not the green things,
Yeah. So maybe by the time you're in the 10 to 12 age group, you're growing something more intense, but you're not expecting the 5 and 6 year olds to be able to do that right off the bat.
That might be part of graduating, is being able to grow a more complicated plant. And those probably might exist in the regular gardens as well. But, like, part of being able to graduate is being able to, like, keep pretty fancy plants alive. Like, more than essential fancy plants alive. I like that idea.
Okay, I'm cool with that.
And maybe, like, younger, you're growing, like, herbs, where it's not essential to live, but it helps.
Well, and, like, I think that the classes also wouldn't necessarily grow separate plants. Like, they're all in the kindergarten. The classes are going to have different responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Like, when you're younger, it's like, do you want to hold the watering can and tip it?
Right.
Don't do too much. Like, you don't want the dirt all to wash away, And then also, I mean, some of that is going to be just educating, like, oh, like, set a chalkboard up, this is a bee, stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
Mandy, was the, like, in between kindergarten and, like, full graduation, was that also where they did, like, history and, like,
so the
social learning as well, like or government learning?
Yes. So you still have, so in the kindergarten, the reason your hours are shorter in the gardens is because you're still having to actually go into a classroom, quote unquote, of sorts, where you're learning, it's the difference between second grade history and fifth grade history of, here's the Eco Urb. But then when you graduate from kindergarten, you're still going into class, but you're getting the more in-depth things. So, you're probably learning a lot more about what happened, the history of the world versus, just your own Eco Urb.
Right.
Can it be based on classical education? It like matches learning to child development. So like the first stage is the grammar stage where you're like memorizing basics, you're getting foundational knowledge. And then the second stage is logic stage, like you're making connections between the things that you've learned. The third stage is rhetoric stage where you're like forming arguments putting pieces together, like, it's the most advanced one where you're using all of the foundational stuff in order to propose new things and take initiative.
I like that. Okay, so the add-on to what Mandy said, where in like middle school you have a lot more like history focused and more like in-depth, honest history focused stuff. So this is after you leave the kindergarten, you're still going to classrooms. The other half of that is learning a great deal about your local government and your local history and how specifically in your Eco Urbs, different groups of people interact. Mm-hmm. So if you have an Eco Urb where you have a steel foundry, you're going to learn a lot about the steel foundry and what those people want, how that affects the way the rest of the Eco Urb functions, and how to function politically in your Eco Urb, right? So that's kind of the rhetoric stage that you're talking about, is a lot of learning about that. Like, this is the huge amount of history of our Eco Urb and why we have, different people relating. So specifically for Smokey Banks, this has been teased a little bit. There is a university there because there are prehistoric ruins in the town, or like within the confines of the Eco Urb. So there's a lot of information about what does it mean that we have this university here where we have academics that study that. Or you're going to learn a lot about the history of fishing. We live next to an ocean, So it's really specific to your Eco Urb as well. All right, Zach, what's up?
My thought was also like empathy as a course. Like college level courses, you have a class on ethics, something similar to that's called like empathy, where it's like teaching you how to live with the world and with each other and how things interconnect. But I think that is something that is taught throughout all of school now, instead of just being like a capstone thing where you have to take once. It's like,
I think focusing on socialization, is a key part of this.
Where it's like, oh, we're doing this thing. Like, how does that make your neighbors feel when you keep all of the resources? Yeah,
I think that there has to be a certain amount of, for lack of a better word, indoctrination into what does it mean to be a functional member of society. That has to be a part of, being in the kindergarten, and then after that, that there is that expectation.
I think it's just that, like, there's communitarian values versus anything that we have.
Well, and I don't think it's indoctrination either necessarily. I mean, like, you can call it that.
I think anything is indoctrination. I don't think it's I think it's neutral.
Yeah, I was gonna say, by hook or by crook, I think that we all do it, and we just don't want to call it that because it sounds bad, but it's like we all do propaganda. It's propaganda. It's fine. Yeah. We all do it.
I don't know. I like the idea of them like recreating what the cities were like beforehand, and seeing like, and having the kids point out the failures, like.
Yeah, I don't know if they would do that specifically, but I think there would be a lot of focus on that time. Like, this is what happened that made us leave this system. You know what I mean?
I think that would be part of your history, is going through the why. Why are we here?
Yeah.
What happened before that means that we're here. Yeah.
And then, so moving past that, once you're maybe 2-3 years of that kind of education, like young teenager, you are, in terms of work, considered an adult. This is not to say that, like, socially you're considered an adult necessarily. Like, I'm not advocating for 15-year-old brides, but within, like, rights as a member of society, you're an adult when you're around 14 or 15. So you work 20 hours a week in the Eco Urb. If you want to learn a trade, you start as an apprentice. You have to seek education in that. You get qualified in it eventually as like some kind of journeyman that can do it on their own, and then eventually can become a master, or whatever levels of accreditation there are. So, like, specifically for Mandy's character, she wanted to be a veterinarian. That required her to leave her Eco Urb and go someplace to get higher study for that. And then she ended up staying there. Sorry, Mandy, I'm spoiling your backstory a little bit.
That's fine.
But it's a good example of how this would work. Is like, she would start that journey when she's 15, right? Now, it's really common for, you might be an apprentice with a 50-year-old man who went, I want to start being a veterinarian now, and who changed his course in life and became an apprentice veterinarian. But that is on top of 20 hours a week working in the gardens, but you're no longer required to do education,
You said what I was going to say, where I don't think it's frowned upon to switch hobby or vocations or skills. Like, it's like, I want to be a blacksmith, and you spend 20 years being a blacksmith, and you're like, I don't like being a blacksmith. I want to be a potter. I want to make pottery. And people don't look down upon that. Like, even if you get less credits, just wealth isn't, no one cares about wealth.
It's not as necessary. You don't need it to, you're not going to starve and you're not going to die.
Right. So it's like,
you might not get as nice of luxury items as someone who's a master at something, but maybe you enjoy learning skills more than you enjoy having the fancier bike, you know?
Right, and I think society doesn't look down on you for not having the fancy bike.
No, definitely not, because it just isn't as necessary. Yeah, it's not a signifier. It's a signifier of something else, yeah.
Yeah, I think society looks for you to find the right thing for you to do, not for you to be a master in anything.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
You know, so it's like if they would rather you, like, be an apprentice blacksmith if that's what you love and you're terrible at it, than be a master seamstress if you hate it.
Right. I agree with all of that. Was there anything else in that, Mandy, that we needed to talk about? I think that was the big points. Oh, moving out. I think that also happens a lot more at different ages. Like, generally, it's like, oh, you're an adult when you're 18. It's like, well, it would not be altogether uncommon for 15-year-olds to live together. Like, that is probably way more frequent that you have, like, it's not, like, required, but if there's, you know, a big apartment block that gets made within the gardens, it's like, yeah, a lot of young people just end up kind of congregating there because that's where they want to live. Because really, it's like, you can live wherever you want as long as there's a bed there and everyone's agreeing to it. So there would be a mix of private domiciles and also, you know, people kind of self-sort themselves. I don't think there would need to be as much, like, rigid, you have to spend money to do this, you know what I mean?
All right, I want to talk more about culture of Eco Urbs.
Okay, go for it.
I think the thing that is more unifying among all the Eco Urbs, there's less variance, is holidays. There are certain holidays there are religious holidays that are kind of like across that denomination or that sect or whatever you want to call it that are celebrated, and there are quote unquote national holidays. You know, like the launching of the first satellite. All the Eco Urbs celebrate.
Yeah, there's definitely some. Yeah.
And I think holidays are more of the unifying things between Eco Urbs. Like, all Eco Urbs celebrate launching day.
Yeah.
All lunarists celebrate the birth of a new goddess.
Yeah.
Where a lot of things are like how they celebrate and all that is variable. A lot, and like a lot of the other things we've talked about kind of changes based on Eco Urb. I think the holidays are kind of the more uniting thread between all of them, where, you know, Lunar Ascension Day is always Lunar Ascension Day, Launching Day is always Launching Day, and people kind of just agree on that, and that's kind of common ground where people meet on things.
I like that idea.
There's more of a rhythm to Eco Urb, like work and rest. Because there's more unity around.
And specifically, I think it's the one time globally where there's unity. Where, you know, because like everything, like as we talked about, like music is completely different based on Eco Urb.
Oh, well, there was another thing we talked about being unified, and I still think should be, which is the obstacle courses. I think those are also still.
Oh yes,
like
sports. Yes. Sports is the other thing.
The sports are also still really big.
But and I just think the holidays are kind of their own thing as well. Where it's like there are a few unifying things, and I think holidays is one of them. Where kind of across the board there aren't like. No everyone like has their own like day of founding, which is kind of unique when they were founded.
I think there would be unique holidays, but there are big tentpole ones that are across the world. Yeah.
And I think the big tentpole ones are the bigger holidays.
Yeah, I think especially at this point, like the satellite launch day is a really big one for sure.
Right. It's like kind of the difference between like Christmas and Sweetest Day. You know, like Sweetest Day exists in the United States. But Christmas is kind of the one that exists globally at this point.
Right.
What is the other one?
Sweetest Day? It's in, like, September. It's kind of like where you give candy to someone you like. It's like Valentine's Day.
Maybe there was between, like, St. Patrick's Day and Christmas, right? Like,
yeah, sorry. That's a better example.
Christmas is kind of, like, transcended any of its, like, religious backgrounds, and it's always kind of been a little bit of, like, stolen from other things, religious background, and now it's, like, massively, it's so ubiquitous that like the holiday season, right, is everywhere. Whereas St. Patrick's Day is pretty unique to only, well, I guess a lot of people celebrate that too.
I think it's mostly United States from what I've heard.
Anyways, it doesn't matter. It's mostly the United States, and I guess technically it's mostly Catholic, but
wherever you go in all the world, you'll find an Irish pub.
Yeah, right.
I listened to that song today.
All right, Zach, anything else you want to tack on?
That was the main thing I wanted to talk about. Let me look at the...
We still have to get to Smokey Banks, so say no.
Cool. Anyone else want to add anything else?
No.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wanderlust. Music for this show is credited down below. If you like this campaign, you can find more of our shows at the Wandering Gamer website or on Podbean. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Links in the description. Now bear in mind, in the wilds, some wander to get lost, and some wander to find themselves.